The auctioneer's gavel came down on lot 114, and 27 goats stood shivering in a livestock trailer meant for cattle, their ribs showing through matted hair, their eyes glassy with the particular exhaustion of animals who have stopped expecting anything good to happen to them. Nobody bid. Nobody wanted skeletons. Nobody, that is, except a 31-year-old woman named Marlowe Petrakis, standing at the back rail in a barn coat 2 sizes too big, who raised her paddle when the price dropped to $40 a head and said, loud enough for the whole sale barn to hear, "I'll take all 27. The room laughed. Somebody near the coffee urn said, "Lady, that ain't livestock, that's a compost pile with legs." She didn't laugh back. She wrote the check. 18 months later, in the worst drought Coldwater County, Kansas had seen since the Dust Bowl generation told stories about it. Marlowe Petrakis' 40 acres were the only green thing for 11 miles in any direction. Satellite images the county extension office pulled up during a drought briefing showed it plainly. A scorched brown map of dead pasture and cracked stock ponds, and in the middle of it, a stubborn emerald square that made the agent doing the presentation stop mid-sentence and say, "Wait, back that up. What is that?" This is the story of how she got there, and why the answer wasn't luck. Coldwater County had always been cattle country. Marlowe's neighbors ran Angus and Hereford crosses on leased range that had been leased by their fathers and grandfathers before them, and they measured a farmer's worth in tonnage pounds of beef per acre, bushels of wheat per season. When Marlowe bought the old Sorensen homestead 2 years earlier with money from a nursing career she'd walked away from, the county's opinion of her solidified fast. City money, bad judgment, won't last a winter. The goats didn't help. Everyone in a 50-mile radius knew where those 27 animals had come from a collapsed dairy operation 2 counties over, seized by the state after an inspector found the herd starved down to bone. The owner too broke and too proud to admit he needed help before it was too late. The goats that survived the seizure went to auction as a liability nobody wanted. Marlowe wanted them. Her neighbor Dutch Callahan, who ran 300 head of cattle on the section bordering hers, watched her unload the trailer that first day and didn't bother hiding what he thought. "You know goats eat everything down to dirt, right? You'll have a moonscape by June." He wasn't wrong about goat behavior in general. He was wrong about what Marlowe intended to do with hers, because Marlowe hadn't bought browsers to turn loose on open pasture. She'd bought them because of something she'd read 3 years earlier during a slow shift in a hospital break room. In a soil science journal, a friend had left behind an article about a ranching method called holistic planned grazing, developed decades earlier by a biologist named Alan Savory, who'd spent a career studying why grasslands that lose their large herds of grazing animals often turn to desert faster, not slower, than grasslands that keep them. The idea ran against everything Dutch and every rancher in Coldwater County believed. Overgrazing, the thinking went, was caused by too many animals. Savory's research suggested it was actually caused by animals staying too long in one place, not the number of mouths, but the amount of time those mouths spent standing on the same ground, compacting soil, clipping the same regrowth again and again, until the plant gave up and died, leaving bare earth that baked hard in the sun and shed rainwater instead of drinking it. The fix wasn't fewer animals. It was moving them constantly, mimicking the old bison herds that used to sweep across the plains in tight, predator-pressured groups, graze an area hard for a day or two, and move on before returning months later, giving the grass time to recover, and the manure and hoof action time to work organic matter back into the soil. Marlowe didn't have bison. She had 27 half-dead goats, 40 acres, and 18 months to prove something before the bank note on the homestead came due. She built her first paddock fence electric mesh, the kind you can move by hand in 20 minutes around a 2-acre strip the day the goats arrived, and for the first month she did almost nothing but feed them back to health. Alfalfa hay, mineral supplement, a vet visit that cost more than she wanted to think about for a doe with a respiratory infection that nearly didn't make it. Neighbors watching from the road saw a woman who'd sunk her savings into an unwinnable project. What they didn't see was Marlowe walking her acreage every evening with a notebook, mapping which strips of grass were coming back and which weren't. Timing her moves against rainfall, she was tracking almost obsessively on a rain gauge nailed to the barn post. By the second spring, the goats no longer skeletal, now sleek and solid, kids born that season bouncing around paddocks like they owned, the place were rotating through 16 separate 2-acre cells on a schedule Marlowe adjusted week to week. Graze hard for 2 days. Move. Don't come back to that ground for at least 40. The manure they left behind wasn't swept up or wasted. It broke down into the topsoil along with trampled plant litter that the goats' hooves pressed into the ground instead of leaving to blow away. And that litter did something almost nobody in Coldwater County was thinking about that spring. It covered bare soil, which meant it shaded the ground from evaporation, and let whatever rain did fall actually soak in instead of running off across cracked, sun-baked earth. Dutch Callahan's cattle, meanwhile, grazed his 400 acres the way cattle had grazed there for 3 generations, turned loose across big open pastures all season, drifting toward the same shade trees and stock ponds day after day, wearing bare patches into the ground around every water source, clipping the same tender regrowth before it ever had a chance to put down deeper roots. It had always worked well enough in a normal year. 19 months after Marlowe bought her goats, Coldwater County stopped having normal years. The drought arrived in early spring and didn't leave. By June, the county's rain gauge, the official one, at the extension office had logged less than 2 inches since January. Dutch's 400 acres turned the color of a paper bag. Stock ponds that had never gone dry in his father's lifetime cracked into hexagonal plates of mud. He started trucking in hay in July, a full 2 months earlier than any drought year he could remember, and the price of that hay climbed every week the sky stayed empty. Marlowe's 40 acres told a different story, and it was the kind of story that's hard to dismiss once you're standing in the middle of it. Her soil, thanks to 18 months of trampled organic matter and root systems that hadn't been repeatedly clipped down to nothing, held moisture the way a sponge holds water instead of shedding it the way a parking lot does. The grass wasn't green because it was raining on her and not on Dutch. It was green because when it did rain, her ground kept the water instead of losing it, and because deeper, undisturbed root systems could reach moisture stored further down than shallow, overgrazed roots ever could. Extension agents driving the county road that ran between the 2 properties started slowing down without meaning to. One of them, a soil conservationist named Priya Anand, who'd spent 6 years telling skeptical Kansas ranchers about regenerative grazing with limited success, finally had a photograph she didn't need to explain twice. Dutch's dust-brown 400 acres on one side of a single fence line, Marlowe's green 40 on the other, the line between them almost surgically straight. That photograph made the county paper. Then it made a regional agricultural bulletin. Then, in a turn nobody in Coldwater County saw coming, it made Marlowe Petrakis, the nurse who bought skinny goats nobody wanted, the person the extension office asked to speak at a drought resilience meeting that Dutch Callahan, along with 40 other ranchers who'd spent 2 years quietly writing her off, showed up to attend. She didn't gloat. She stood up in a community hall that still smelled like the church potlucks it hosted on Sundays and told them about a biologist named Alan Savory, about bison herds and predator pressure, and the difference between animal numbers and animal timing, about a soil that had forgotten how to hold water because it had been given no reason to try. She told them the goats weren't the trick. The trick was never letting them stay still. Dutch Callahan didn't say much that night. But the following spring, he split his 400 acres into rotational paddocks for the first time in his life, moved his cattle every 3 days instead of turning them loose for the season, and told anyone who asked that he wasn't doing it because he believed in it, yet he was doing it because he'd stood at that fence line during the worst drought of his career and seen, with his own eyes, which side of it was still alive. The 27 goats nobody wanted are still on Marlowe Petrakis' land today, along with the 11 kids born to them, rotating through paddocks on a schedule she still keeps by hand in a notebook now 3 volumes thick. The soil they've built, season after season, isn't something you can see from the road the way you can see a barn or a fence. But it's there, underground, doing the slow, invisible work that decided, on one cracked and rainless summer, exactly which 40 acres in Coldwater County were still worth calling a farm. Somewhere out there, there's a rancher standing at his own fence line right now, looking at ground that's failing him, wondering if the animals he's been taught to see as the problem might actually be the only thing that could have saved it.